Every morning, Sarah wiped down the counters and arranged the menus on the tables before the sun had fully risen. She liked to get the diner ready before anyone else arrived because it gave her a quiet moment to think and to feel like she was preparing, not just for the day, but for something bigger than herself. She had been working at Miller's Diner for almost 5 years, and over time she had gotten to know most of the regulars by name and by the way they ordered their coffee or the exact way. They liked their eggs cooked. But there was one man who had become a particular part of her routine. Mr. Harrison was an elderly man who came in every morning without fail. He was small and stooped with white hair that fell over his ears in soft waves and glasses that always seemed to slide down his nose. He would take the same booth by the window and wait patiently while Sarah brought over a cup of black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. He never asked for anything extra, never complained about the way the toast was done, and always smiled politely when she handed him his food. Sarah never knew much about his life, except that he lived alone and that he always seemed content to sit quietly with a newspaper and a half-full cup of coffee. She liked the rhythm of it, the predictability of seeing him there every day in a world that often felt so chaotic and rushed. But it was not just routine for her. It was a small connection, a small kindness she could offer to someone who clearly needed it more than most days passed. In the same gentle way, Sarah would watch him sip his coffee, stir the eggs slowly on his plate, and sometimes glance out the window as if he were remembering something from long ago. She wondered what stories he carried in his eyes, and why he always seemed so calm and untroubled when the world outside could be so loud and unrelenting. She would greet him with a soft good morning, and he would reply with the same simple words, and for a few moments, the diner felt like a tiny bubble where nothing else mattered. Not the deadlines, not the arguments, not the traffic on Main Street, just the quiet presence of a man and the small comfort of a hot meal. It became the highlight of her mornings. She found herself looking forward to the moment when she would see him walk through the door, adjusting his hat and coat. She noticed the way he always gave a small nod to the cook in the kitchen, and the way he folded his newspaper just so before setting it down on the table. He never asked for sugar in his coffee or cream or anything fancy. He was content with the simplicity of it, and it made her feel as if her small gestures mattered more than they really did. One morning she caught herself thinking about how lonely someone like him might be if not for these brief exchanges, and it made her heart ache in a quiet way. She wished she could do more, but the thought of intruding into his life felt wrong, so she contented herself with the small smiles, the polite thank yous, the way he always left the diner looking a little lighter than when he came in. There was a calmness that settled over her after he left, a kind of satisfaction that came from having helped someone start their day just a little better. She went through the motions of the rest of her morning, but her mind kept wandering back to the booth by the window, and the small figure of Mr. Harrison sitting there with his coffee and eggs, and the sense that she was part of something, gentle and meaningful, even if it was just for a few minutes each day. It was a Wednesday morning like any other. Sarah arrived early, humming softly to herself as she set out the coffee cups and wiped the counters clean. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the small diner, and she could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. She glanced at the clock and noticed it was only a few minutes before Mr. Harrison usually arrived. She felt a familiar sense of anticipation and relief. When she saw his slow, steady figure making its way down the sidewalk, he adjusted his coat and hat as always and gave a small nod when he entered the diner. She waved and carried his usual coffee and plate over to the booth by the window. But today, something felt different. He looked around the diner with a slight frown and then back at her as if he were searching for something or someone. Before he finally sat down, Sarah felt a small pang of worry but tried to smile through it. She placed the coffee and eggs on the table, and he thanked her in his usual quiet way. She asked if everything was all right, and he simply nodded but did not answer fully. She took a seat at the counter, trying to focus on the other customers, but her eyes kept darting back to him, wondering what could be troubling him. Just then, the bell above the door jingled in a louder, more authoritative way than usual, and Sarah looked up to see 4 men in dark suits with earpieces and sunglasses enter the diner. They moved with a precision and quiet confidence that immediately made her stop mid-step. Her heart beat faster as she realized they were heading straight toward Mr. Harrison. She watched as a well-dressed woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of command, followed behind them, carrying a leather briefcase. The men surrounded the table, and the woman spoke to Mr. Harrison in a calm yet firm voice. Sarah could not hear their words, but the atmosphere changed in an instant. He seemed to straighten in his seat and nodded slowly. She felt a strange combination of relief and fear, because she had never seen him like this before. The man who had been so gentle and quiet every morning now seemed like someone else entirely. Someone with secrets and connections she could not even imagine. The lawyers and bodyguards spoke quietly among themselves, and then the woman looked directly at Sarah and offered a polite smile. She did not move or say anything, feeling both nervous and curious about what was happening. Mr. Harrison then stood up carefully and turned toward her. She froze, waiting for him to speak, and to her surprise, he gestured for her to follow him. He walked out of the diner with the team behind him, and Sarah hesitated for a moment before following through the door and onto the sidewalk. The morning air was cool and crisp, and she tried to keep pace with the slow, steady steps of the man she had come to know so well. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these people? Why were they here? How had she not known about this part of his life? She wanted to ask, but he only nodded and smiled softly, as if to reassure her that it was all right and that she would understand soon enough. They walked down the street, past familiar shops and into a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The lawyers and bodyguards slid into the vehicle first, and he helped her into the seat next to him. She felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety, and realized that the life of the man she had quietly admired for so long was far more complicated and extraordinary than she had ever imagined. She could not help but glance at him as he adjusted his glasses and looked out the window with a distant, thoughtful expression. She sensed that whatever was about to happen would change everything about her mornings, her routine and the quiet bond they had shared for years, and she wondered if she was ready for what lay ahead, because nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The car moved smoothly through the streets, and Sarah sat quietly beside Mr. Harrison, feeling both nervous and curious. She glanced at him from time to time, noticing the calm way he held himself as if he had done this many times before. He occasionally gave a small, reassuring smile that made her feel slightly less out of place. The lawyers and bodyguards spoke quietly among themselves in low tones that Sarah could not understand, and she tried not to fidget or draw attention to herself. The city outside. The window moved past in a blur of early morning traffic and the occasional pedestrian rushing along the sidewalks. Mr. Harrison finally spoke in a gentle voice, telling her that he had something important to share and that he wanted her to know the truth about why he came to the diner every morning. She listened intently as he explained that for years he had been quietly helping people in need through anonymous donations and acts of kindness, but he had never sought recognition or thanks. He had built a small network of support for struggling families, elderly neighbors, and young students who needed guidance and sometimes financial assistance. He smiled softly and said that Sarah had been part of this without even realizing it, by giving him a moment of kindness every morning, and that her small gestures mattered more than she could know. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that the gentle old man she had served coffee to for years had a life filled with generosity and compassion far beyond what she had imagined. She asked him why the lawyers and bodyguards were with him, and he explained that he was finalizing a large donation that would provide scholarships for children in his town, and he wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. The lawyers were there to manage the legal details and the bodyguards to ensure that no one interfered with the process. He had chosen her to come along because she had been a steady presence in his life. Someone who had shown him kindness without expectation, and he wanted her to witness the culmination of his lifelong efforts as a way of saying thank you and showing her the impact of simple human connection. Sarah felt a mixture of awe and humility as she listened to him describe the lives that had been touched. She realized that the quiet mornings she had spent serving him coffee were part of a much larger story, a story of generosity and care that she had helped sustain without even knowing. And when the car finally stopped at a small community center, she stepped out with him and the team and saw a gathering of children.